Hey there, everybody. Welcome to Amazing Indiana. My name's Fred. It's great to have you back on the channel today. Remember, if you like the channel, please subscribe, and also remember to like this video. Today I'm coming to you from Indianapolis, Indiana, and behind me is the Indiana World War Memorial. Now, this building was originally constructed as a memorial to those men and women from Indiana who had served and fought and died during the First World War. But it has become a memorial for all of Indiana's service people. It's absolutely gorgeous, and it's one of those places which I really hope more and more people will discover and visit. I first came here about 3 or 4 years ago. I had lived in Indiana for about 15 years at that point, and I knew nothing at all about this absolutely magnificent structure. And when we get inside, you're going to see just how absolutely beautiful this particular building is and how it's all part of Amazing Indiana. So we're now inside the shrine of the Indiana World War Memorial Building, and as you can see, this space is amazing. This is one of the most beautiful memorials that I think you will find anywhere in the United States, and certainly this is, without a doubt, one of the most beautiful spaces in all of Indiana, and it is an amazing place to visit. Inside the shrine itself is this altar, and you will note around the interior of this room there are various paintings, and these are the commanders of Allied forces during the First World War. Some of them are pretty obscure figures, but they are commemorated here in this space. And this is the inscription on the front of the altar. And the top of the altar is very beautiful, as we will see in just a second. This is the top part of the altar with the Great Seal of the United States. And underneath the Great Seal are the words of the Pledge of Allegiance. There are all kinds of stunning details in the shrine, and it's an absolutely glorious, glorious place. The inside of the shrine room is exquisite. It is, in a sense, very, very simple, but at the same time very ornate. And as you can see, the space does portray a certain amount of grandeur, and that is certainly what it is meant to convey. And it indeed is just a lovely, lovely place, and one that I think many Hoosiers are not even aware exists. And hopefully this video will encourage you to come and visit this incredible space. This is the Pershing Auditorium, named after General Pershing, who was the head of the American forces in the First World War. This is an auditorium which is just absolutely stunning. Lots to look at in here. And as I move the camera up, you can see the ornate ceiling, and we are directly below the shrine room in the memorial building, and right over the center stage is General Pershing himself. When you descend the stairs from the upper stories of the Indiana War Memorial, you're going to come downstairs into an exquisite military museum which traces Indiana's military history from the time of the French and Indian Wars all the way up through the war against terrorism. And there are numerous displays, lots of interesting armaments to look at. This is an absolute gem of a military museum. And again, this is one of these marvelous things that we have here in Indiana, which I'm sorry to say, many Hoosiers don't even seem to know exists. And I just find that to be somewhat scandalous. There's so much neat stuff down here to take a look at, and I'm just going to do a little bit of a walkthrough here so that you get a sense of what you can come to see here at the museum. So now we're entering into the time of the war between the states, the Civil War, and there are various regimental flags that were carried by divisions and companies from Indiana during the Civil War, and wonderful to see these beautifully preserved flags. And these, incidentally, are the real deal. These are not recreations. These flags have been lovingly preserved, and they're just wonderful to look at. And just think of some of the history that these flags saw during the war between the states. This is again part of the room that deals with the Civil War, but also we're going to be moving into the war that happened after that, and that was the Spanish-American War. But look at these flags. Here is one that was carried at the Battle of Winchester, Virginia, back in 1862. Look at how exquisite that flag is preserved. And also, as we move over here, we can see the flag of the 15th Infantry Regiment from Indiana, and it shows on the flag itself the various battles that this particular regiment fought at. Fascinating stuff. Since the Indiana War Memorial is actually the Indiana World War Memorial, it commemorates the First World War. So what you'll find down here in the basement museum, and gosh, I hate to call it a basement museum because that doesn't do it the honor that it deserves. You'll find extensive displays about the First World War. Now, you know what's so interesting to me? That the First World War is rapidly being forgotten, and that's because there aren't any World War I veterans alive any longer. When I was a kid, I remember meeting a man who had actually been gassed in the trenches, and that was my grandfather. He was in the trenches in France, and he underwent a gas attack. So a lot of this now is just being lost from our collective memory. And moving through the World War I exhibit, there's also stuff about the place of women during the Great War, during the First World War. And we're moving now through more of the World War I exhibits. Great place, particularly to bring kids, I think, and teach them about the First World War. And in this room, again, there are many examples of World War I artifacts. And on this far wall that we're approaching, here is one of the Allied graveyards
in France. And this is, of course, the true cost of war. Here we see a display concerning the World War I Army Nurses Corps. And as I just turn around here for a moment, there's also an interesting display here concerning the Salvation Army. Salvation Army folk visited soldiers in Europe during the First World War and provided for them. Because I like history, I'm naturally drawn to this museum, and I again just see it as a wonderful place to educate people about the history of our country, and especially here in Indiana, the history of Indiana during the great conflicts. And the display that I'm really intrigued by are these posters, these propaganda posters that are in the exhibit concerning World War I. Some really interesting stuff here. These were produced by the Allies, and they inspired people to send money, to purchase war bonds so that the fight might be continued. The museum also has a display concerning the construction of the memorial here in Indianapolis, and the cornerstone of the memorial was laid by General Pershing himself in 1927. And over here you can see a really cool model of the plan for the war memorial, and right in front of us is the war memorial, which indeed was constructed, and this obelisk here was constructed also. And then this is known as American Legion Mall, because it was the American Legion who spearheaded, as I understand it, the construction of this marvelous memorial, and gosh, I'm really glad they did. So the memorial also charts the history of the Second World War, and in front of me is a rather sinister bust. This is Adolf Hitler, obviously, and this particular bust was found in the Reich Chancellery building after the Soviets had occupied it. An American soldier, First Lieutenant Edward Hutton, and he was from Bedford, Indiana, so there's our Indiana connection. He and some other soldiers went into the building and they started to search in the rubble, and they found this particular bust of Hitler, and it was buried underneath rubble, and they were able to smuggle it out. And the most interesting thing here to me is if you look under Adolf's right eye there, you'll see a bullet hole. And the speculation is that that bullet hole was added by a disgruntled German soldier after the Fuhrer's suicide. So this is moving in now to the area of the museum which concerns the Second World War. Again, wow, what a great place to learn history. All kinds of fascinating artifacts in here. I've been recently to the World War II National Memorial Museum down in New Orleans, and I got to say, it's obviously much bigger than this museum. However, this museum really does have a lot of interesting items, and there's always an Indiana connection with all of the items that you see here in the museum. So it helps us to understand Indiana's place in the Second World War. And you can hear some military music playing behind me right now. Very, very inspiring to be in here. And this is the battleship USS Indiana. Nice model of it. Now, the one ship which Indiana is best known for during the Second World War is the USS Indianapolis, and it was a cruiser, and it carried the first atomic bomb to Saipan, where it was placed upon the Enola Gay, and then it was dropped on Hiroshima. Now, what's interesting about the USS Indianapolis is as that destroyer left its mission after having delivered the bomb and steamed away from Saipan, it was torpedoed. And during that torpedoing and the sinking of the ship, thousands of men perished in the waters of the Pacific Ocean, and many of them were attacked by sharks. As a matter of fact, if you're really something of a movie buff, you may remember a scene in the movie Jaws, the original Jaws, where Robert Shaw, Captain Quint, talks about how he had been on the Indianapolis when it was sunk, and recalled all of the men who went into the water and did not come out. You will find in Indianapolis remembrances of the crew of the Indianapolis. This is a painting of war correspondent Ernie Pyle, and Ernie Pyle was a well-loved, well-respected war correspondent during the Second World War. He was a native of Indiana, and the GIs always felt that Ernie represented their struggles very, very well when he wrote his dispatches from the fronts. He died covering the war during the Second World War. This part of the memorial is dedicated to the USS Indianapolis. And here's a scale model of the Indianapolis. And as we move around this room, you can see some of the very ornate silver and dinnerware, which had been carried on the Indianapolis, but was removed during the Second World War and kept for safekeeping, and it's displayed here. And here we have a description of the Indianapolis's final mission, and that was when she carried the atomic bomb that was going to be dropped on Hiroshima to the staging area, and the Indianapolis was then lost on July the 30th, 1945, and you can see where she went down here on this map. The story of the Indianapolis is one that's becoming increasingly well known, and this is a model of the submarine that actually sank the Indianapolis. And the irony is that the Indianapolis was sunk just before the conclusion of the war. And here's a recreation, incidentally, of the radio room of the USS Indianapolis, and all of the equipment in this room is typical of what would have been used by the Navy during 1945. So it's kind of interesting to come back here and see all of this old radio equipment, and to think about how the Indianapolis had to maintain radio silence. So as I understand it, the ship sank even before the radios could have gotten out any information concerning the Japanese attack on the Indianapolis. So you leave the area of the Second World War, and you now enter into a part of the museum which might be more familiar to many of us. This concerns the Cold War period, and here you'll find displays concerning Korea and Vietnam, and also later on the War on Terror. So we'll move through here, and you can see there's a lot of interesting items, a lot of interesting depictions. This commemorates, this area of the museum that we're in right now commemorates those Hoosiers who fought and also died in Korea, which is sometimes known as America's terrible winter war. And here you can see this diorama attempts to show some of the brutality of Kosin. Kosin was a terrible battle that U.S. Marines engaged in, and many of the Marines ended up dying not because of enemy fire, but they died because of the extreme bitter cold. This exhibit commemorates one of Indiana's hero governors, Governor Joe Kernan. And Governor Kernan, who died, I think, a dozen years ago or so, had been a naval aviator. He was shot down over North Vietnam, and here you can see the prison suit that he wore when he was held by the North Vietnamese, and some of his medals and some of the things that he possessed when he was in captivity. Governor Kernan, when he was shot down, was flying a reconnaissance aircraft known as the Vigilante, and he went down over North Vietnam. And this picture is really great, and I'll try to get up close to it. He is in that picture, third row back on the left, and this is one of the POW flights that came out of Hanoi, and here he is as he was liberated and is greeted by his father when he got back to the United States. So regardless of your politics, Governor Kernan was indeed an American hero and one who should be remembered and revered. This part of the museum concerns the most recent war that the United States has been involved in, and that is the War on Terror. And we can move through this particular area, and there are artifacts from the attack at the World Trade Center. Also, here we find a piece of the Pentagon that was attacked on September the 11th by American Airlines Flight 77. And moving in here, we will find all kinds of interesting displays concerning the War on Terror. And here, this also might be bittersweet these days for many people, because so much of what you'll find upstairs here in this part of the exhibit concerns the American involvement in Afghanistan, and very, very bittersweet at this time in our history. So as we move around here, we can see some fairly recent American history. And this is history right now that is not over. This history is still being written even today as I'm speaking to you. Obviously, one of the things that this museum concentrates on are the contributions of Hoosier veterans, and around the museum there are numerous displays concerning Hoosiers, people from Indiana who fought and died for the United States of America during our various armed conflicts. Their stories are very, very inspiring, and this really is a great place to come and contemplate the sacrifices that these veterans made on behalf of our country. So I highly recommend a visit to this particular memorial and museum, and it's here in Indiana, in Indianapolis.